Okay. All right. So, my focus today is going to be hopefully teaching all of you how you can survive scale with a small team who aren't all experts. So, as some background, I'm Charlie McConnell. Oh, look at that. You're the man. Anyway, so, I'm Charlie McConnell. Most of you know me as Avian Flu. I'm a VP Devops Node.js. I'm a minor Node.js and libuv contributor. I'm also a retired actor, a retired bartender, and really, really fond of having a real job finally. Real big into that. In my personal opinion, Node is the best thing to happen to systems programming since the discovery of caffeine. I know that's a little async there, but it's basically that cool. Back in the day, prior to Node coming around, anything you wanted to do in this kind of thing, there's languages like Bash. Shell scripts are how a lot of this stuff gets done by default. There's a lot of really cool things you can do in Bash. You can make little programs, and you can just one character to have the output from one go to the input in the other. Most of the stuff you do spawns little tiny processes. There's really a lot of cool stuff you can do. It's difficult to not do things in series in Bash, and it can get really, really complicated. The syntax is pretty arcane, and you're into neckbeard territory by the time you have to do anything really fancy with it. Another alternative, an old favorite of mine, is Perl. Perl it's got really fluid, really adaptable syntax. They've got that old Tim Towdy expression, there's more than one way to do it. And it's very easy to write, especially if you're coming from the things that existed before it did. Perl, it's been around for a long time, and if you spend a lot of time reading about Bash or C and then you go into Perl, it's really, really easy by comparison. Not so much anymore, because the syntax is voodoo. Let's face it, chomp is a keyword. It's just kind of strange. It's a weird little language. And it's synchronous, except for genuinely dubious threading support. If any of you are masochistic and have lots of free time, go check out threads in Perl 588, and don't tell me about it. I've already been there. At any rate, though, all of these tasks, all of the deployment, that's DevOps stuff, these are the chores of the internet. It's something that you can do in a whole bunch of different languages. If you really, really want to make your own version of Lisp and have, do all your deployment stuff in it, you go enjoy yourself. That's all I have to say right there. But JavaScript is better. There's a lot of things it has that are really advantageous for this kind of thing. Born in the browser, it's evented by nature. It was built around all of this, on-click, do something, here's some code, that kind of thing. And with Node especially, doing things in a parallel fashion is massively simpler. You don't have to deal with crazy Bash syntax. You don't have to deal with threading. It just goes around in a loop. You can make a bunch of sockets. It's just much easier. And the bad parts of JavaScript that everyone complains about, all this callback hell and the weird stuff where you got undefined and null and all these things to worry about, you can learn that in a matter of weeks. It's not insane, arcane things, and it's easy to pick up. And to be perfectly frank, Node is the only way that a retired bartender, an 18-year-old Polish kid, and one legit systems engineer could possibly keep this many servers running. The one legit systems engineer being Bradley Meck, who's the man. So, the way that this all started, Node.js is a small company. We do not have that big of a team. I was originally hired as the only tech support guy. So, when things are going wrong, and you're the only person awake, and you're not quite sure what goes on, you just kind of have to scratch your head. And it's time to resort to what we refer to as Cowboy DevOps. Now, let me just have a second here. So, once upon a time, it was late at night, I was the only one awake, I discovered our load balancers were crashing. I don't actually remember what the bug was at this point. Things like that happen from time to time. So, I'm the only one awake, and I'm saying, what do? I can see the bug, and I can fix it. I've got a patch for this, but what do? Like, I've had my SSH keys on these servers for about a week. I haven't had to deploy anything. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, well, Node is a pretty cool child process API. I know how SSH works, so this is, okay, that's legible? Yeah, that's legible. Fancy that. All right, so we've got Node's fancy child process module, some stuff. Async saves typing. That's really all it is. Like, there are times when you should use it, there are times when you should not use it, but it's very useful for this kind of thing. Especially right down here, this async.forEach limit, it allows you to set a concurrency limit. Anybody, if you just try to make a big loop and do a whole bunch of stuff, you'll hit EM file pretty quick because it just doesn't count by itself. You can just keep going and keep going and keep going, stuff like that. So it just saves a lot of typing. One little caveat I've noticed in all of this, as you, when you're setting up file descriptors to redirect the standard I/O to, you have to open the same file twice because you can't use the same file descriptor twice. It's a little gotcha there. But at any rate, here we've got very simple little, spawn SSH. You want SSH keys involved in this. Do not try to pipe in the passwords. Just take my word for that. And then, everything comes down to bash in the end. So you just got a little bit of a patch here. Now, this right here, this is probably my favorite part, the standard I/O thing here, because you can just specify streams, file descriptors. You can just have it inherit from the parent. And here I've got it inheriting standard in and using these two file descriptors I set up earlier, which are in fact the same file, the log.log. And then, that doesn't apply anymore. So at any rate, just listen for the exit event and then just wait until it's all done. So the funny thing about this is, all right, so I've set up a little patch here. Oh, what's this about? Am I not on Wi-Fi anymore? Oh, that's a shame. I guess I'll have to deploy that in a minute. At any rate, I had Machi come up with a little patch right here, if you can see it. And I was about to deploy a patch to our production load balancers adding the xnode Dublin is awesome header. It'll be up later. I'm just going to move on at this point. Oops. Go away, Twitter. All right. Back to Cowboy DevOps. Anyway, the point is, a support guy or an intern could do this when it really comes down to it, and that's one of the really awesome things about Node. But as I'm sure many of you might have already guessed, it doesn't really scale directly to just do this kind of thing in a loop. It's a very old school way of doing it, and it's there's a whole bunch of problems that come up. You can only run so many at a time. The concurrency is very limited. You have to limit yourself to about 3 processes per core, which makes having 1,000 servers a really slow thing to do. But it can get you done, and it's better than having your main product crash when no one's looking, because that kind of makes you look bad. So, on that point, Cowboy DevOps, some simple rules to prolong your sanity. The very first, very most important point in all of this, rule number 1, shit must work. We are shipping products. I'm in charge of keeping a hosting company running. If you type Jitsu deploy and it fails, we already fucked up. This is the most important thing. You can talk about ugly code, you can talk about best practices. If it's crashing in production, you need to fix it now. On that point, rule 2, production debugging sucks, very frankly. So, it really doesn't take a whole lot of work to set yourself up with a staging environment that'll get deployed to automatically every time somebody pushes to the repo. And there's just no reason to not have a staging environment, even in a small team. It's just really not that much work. And the stress involved in production debugging is one of the things that will really tax an ops team. It's just not healthy. Rule 3, there is no rule 3. Rule 4, don't burn out your ops team. They are very valuable people. They work very stressful jobs. And you need to make sure that people are well fed. You need to make sure they're sleeping. I have a rule at Node.js. If I find out you've been up for 24 hours, I revoke your SSH key from the cloud until you've slept. That's it. Like, just no. Just no. On the subject of not burning out your ops team, deputize your tech support. Especially at Node.js, we tend to use tech support as an entry-level job for all sorts of people. And we encourage the tech support guys to figure out something, a part of the stack that they're interested in, and then dive in and fix things. And if somebody shows up and they're like, hey, I found this weird bug, well, you have commit access. So, rule 6, eat your own dog food. Use your own services. You have to. The approach that Node.js takes is that we try to do just about everything in Node until we find out it's a terrible idea. And it all comes down to this. We use our own tools, we host our own sites with our own platform, and you just have to be that familiar with what you're doing in order to have a good understanding of how it runs, especially when you go from having 100 beta users to having 10,000 paying users, which we just did a few weeks ago. So, Node.js has a very unique problem also. We run arbitrary code from random strangers, and some of them are geniuses, and some of them are really, really not. One time in particular, there was an IRC bot. So this IRC bot was deployed to a drone, and it was timing out mysteriously. And I spent a whole bunch of time digging into this, and I dug into the IRC library that was being used, and I was playing with the pings and pongs and like capturing packets and all this kind of stuff. And then out of frustration, sheer frustration, I started removing dependencies one by one. And I noticed that this one particular library, making HTTP requests, once I removed it, the whole problem went away. And this is why. I'm just going to let this sit on the screen for a second. Yeah. That was a funny day. Yeah. That will loop forever, just for the record. In the interest of full disclosure, the bot was Kohai, the noob was me. One of the things that I really like about Node for all of this stuff, Node is great for logging. You can make all sorts of crazy streams and pipe things around and attach event listeners to things. And you can expose all sorts of really interesting metrics for yourself in this regard. With that said, Node.js is terrible at logging because standard output is kind of synchronous and you're in a single thread. You're in an event loop the whole time. So if you do too much and if you try to instrument too much with simple output, you're going to slow yourself down to an astonishing degree. And it's not really recommended. There are better ways to instrument yourself than console log. So, SmartOS. SmartOS is pretty awesome, and it's a wonderful thing. There are a lot of really cool things about it. We've got dtrace, of course, is really awesome. The whole ZFS thing with the zones, it's just a really, it's a cool operating system. Our bandwagon is awesome. Make sure you actually need to jump on it. Moving a production deployment from one operating system to another is a really, really big thing to do. You don't want to do this lightly. You don't want to do this because someone told you it was cool. And you don't want to do this without having people who understand the problems at hand. We've had to learn this the hard way. In my personal opinion, humans and chimps probably have more DNA in common than Linux and SmartOS have APIs in common. Humans and chimps are, it's past 99% in common, so it seems like a safe assertion. But at any rate, I was trying to programmatically get string signal names in C for some dumb thing I was trying to do a couple of weeks ago. And there's one API on SunOS for that. There's another on BSD, and I could not find one on Linux. And the more you dig, the more of that kind of stuff you find. And it's a low level of knowledge that you only learn it through hard knocks and experience. It's a very difficult thing to do. One of the big things that we've had to deal with is memory management in a 256 meg VM with no swap. The no swap came as kind of a surprise. Our previous deployment involved a bunch of Linux VMs, and it was set up where they all had swap files. So if someone was leaking memory profusely, that's cool. Oh, his app got slow. That makes sense. It's reading off the swap. Let's just restart it. We'll help him find the leak. Everything's fine. But in a SmartOS zone, that doesn't really exist. We don't have swap set up. So it has been a long, long adventure of learning all of the different ways that an unhappy OS can kill something you don't want it to when it runs out of memory. It's just a game of random chance about what's going to call malloc next. And I have seen an unbelievable number of things. SIGEMT, for example, emulation trap. I didn't even expect that existed. So, yeah, I heard a great quote a week or two ago. Someone was saying that you should have your own daemon kill something that's not important before the OS kills something that is. It can get messy sometimes. Do you maintain a C++ add-on? Have you tested it on SmartOS? Because I bet you beer it's broken. A lot of people, it's pretty easy to whip up a C++ add-on for Node, and you can expose things, you can bind to system APIs and things like this, but the inconsistencies will really kill you, and there are a lot of just strange things you can run into. The Node MongoDB driver right now it fails making connections on SmartOS because of some really low-level obscure change that I only kind of understand. So that's been one of the problems of the last week or so, is that we've had to tell people to lock a specific version of that. It's a good idea anyway, but you know, why doesn't it work locally? You're not running SmartOS locally. So, fork to the libio thread pool and you. So forever, our process monitor, it used to use an add-on called daemon node, and it had all of these really strange problems. My forking Node in the sense of the fork system call when you fork a process, you make an exact clone of it. Any file descriptors you have open are open, like everything's the same. The trouble is, if it was a multi-threaded process, the threads just don't exist. So, if you try to do this to a Node HTTP server, for example, everything will work fine. The server will respond to requests, but if you put like an async read file in there somewhere, it's just going to hang forever because it's trying to reference threads that just don't exist. So it's an automatic deadlock and a whole lot of fun. Here we are. All right. So a lot of people spend time talking about how Node is a silver bullet, and I kind of getting tired of this thing, like saying it's not a silver bullet. I think Node is a silver bullet because if you think about it, silver bullets are kind of terrible. It's a soft metal. You would not actually want to shoot at anything you'd want to hurt. So it's good for specific tasks when you know what you're supposed to use it for, i.e. a werewolf. But yeah, subpar on people. Yeah. We at Node.js like to push the envelope. As I said before, we like to try everything we can in Node to find out whether or not it works. And then we'll let you know later. And that's the whole idea. And I keep having this dream, this really peculiar dream here. And I just keep dreaming of a shell that supports bash where you could also just like, let me move this thing over here real quick. Damn it. Yeah, I keep dreaming of a shell where you could do like, you know, it's a regular shell, everything's cool, but then, where did that go? But then you could just like, you know, write random JavaScript in there, because why not? Oh, that's lame. Well, that was supposed to be way cooler than that, but I totally made a Node shell and I'm totally open sourcing it on Monday. Anyway. Yeah. At any rate, that's about what I've got. Thank you.